MTN SME Hub. Link to growth. Link to success. Link to the ultimate resource for business advice and insights.
Welcome back to the Big Small Business Show. We are talking to Pippa Hauptfleisch. She's the founder of Pippa's Food, and we're talking about something that I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs about, which is bringing in a partner. So, Pippa, I put a whole bunch of notes down before, and when I asked you why her, the first thing is that what you're looking for in a partner, and you said values. My first words here were values. And the second was work ethic, and you said work ethic was the second two. So far we two down, as in, yeah, that's good. The third thing that's very important, and you spoke about that control, you're a control freak, is this concept of a dominant vision. So that if you get into a partnership, that you have to agree upfront who has the dominant vision. So when I asked you what happens if she wants to go into a different direction, if it's understood that you have the dominant vision with her input, not without her input, but that you have the last say, so to speak, about where the business is going, then that's understood upfront. If that is not discussed upfront, then it's problematic, because then one partner I see pulling the one way, the other partner pulling the other, and then it becomes acrimonious, and then it's the beginning of the end. The last thing, which is quite an obscure thing, is the same financial means. Because if you're going into this now, and let's say you're having a good time, everything's going good, but businesses go up and they go down. If she doesn't have the same means as you, then when I say same means, I'm saying relatively speaking. I'm not saying exactly, but in the same ballpark. If you've got the same work ethic, and somebody can last longer in a negative environment than another, far longer, because they've got other financial means, then generally those partnerships break as well. So that equivalent means, whether it's from her savings or her family or from wherever, that if there's an equivalence to some extent, that's very important if you're going to survive the long term as partners. I often see when that's not there, that these partnerships split up. So speaking about splitting, I think what you need to think about the costs of the splitting the different parts of the business and giving her just one. My strong suggestion is that you don't do that, that if you bring her in, she's in, okay? Because the costs and the complications and I brought that in, it was my client, and how we're going to reconcile, all that becomes quite the basis for the beginning of something that's not going to work. So if I were to do this, and to give you advice, I would say she's either in on a smaller equity on everything, than just giving her a piece of something, especially because it's so intertwined in the rest of the business. And so to unpick that every time is going to become complex and actually expensive to manage. So I would not do it on a piece, I do it on all. In terms of answering the questions I asked you, in terms of salary, I'd keep the salary where it is now, or even perhaps drop it. If there's value in the business, my strong suggestion is that she pays for it in some way, either through sweat or through paying for it. In other words, through that reduction in salary to some extent until it's paid off. And you don't have to value it very high, but I think that once there's a perception of value, that value needs to be acquired in some way, whether it's sweat or equity or cash. And if I were to do this, I would start off with a trial, but you've already had the 2-year trial, so that's done, so that's tick. I'd have an agreement with a clear hurdle. So that's the next phase, is to say, all right, if we don't grow, let's say, for example, I'm just using this number, this is a completely random number. Let's say you had to say you were going to give her 30% of the business. She could buy 30% of the business. If that were the case, for you to be net the same, the business has to be 30% bigger from a net profit perspective, for you to be in an equitable position. And so you might invest in that over time. So what I would put in is that either the equity vests at that point. In other words, she's got an option to buy that 30%, but or the equity vests at the point where you were doing, I'm just making the number up, you were doing 10 million rand this year. As soon as the business gets to 13 million rand, then the equity vests, so that you are net the same as you are now, and it's in a bigger business, and she's been part of that, and she's built the value, and you've built the value. As you said, the business is already 12 years old. Then the next thing, which is horrible to talk about, again, is the clear terms of a divorce, okay, how that split works. In terms of first right of refusal, you'd have some very common clauses in a shareholders agreement. I would strongly suggest a shareholders agreement that you do with somebody you trust, to put that together. And to be very clear, both of you, to know very much like an antenuptial contract with accrual or without, when you get married, if we get divorced, this is how it happens. And have that discussion up front together before you sign that into a shareholders agreement. And do that with a professional person as well. And then the last thing I would say is I would put myself in her shoes and say, well, what's her upside in the long term? If you have to buy her out, so be it. So that might be that you don't have to buy out cash lump sum. It might be that might be in the agreement that you've got 3 years or 2 years to pay her out, and perhaps vice versa if you want to sell to her. Because there's a term often in shareholders agreements which is called the first right of refusal, which says that she wants to sell, she has to offer you first. If you want to sell, you have to offer her first. But sometimes, as you pointed out, you don't have the cash available. So if that is a likelihood, then give each other a fair time to buy those shares out at a given formula. And that is my last point, is what is the way that you value the business? And what's the methodology? Is it a revenue basis? In other words, is it 1 times revenue or 1.5 times revenue? Is it a multiple of net profit after tax? Is it a 3 times net profit after tax? What is the mechanism that you're using to value the business? And put that into the shareholders agreement now, so that it doesn't matter what the net profit is in 5 years' time. You've agreed what the valuation methodology is, whether it's on a turnover or on a net profit or whatever the methodology is. That all goes into the shareholding agreement now. And then you just hope for the best, because it's like marriage. If you've got a great partner, it's the best thing ever, and if you don't, it's the worst thing ever. But I've been in a business partnership for 20 years, brilliant business partnership for 20 years, very successful partnership, trust, shared value, shared work ethic, and all those wonderful things. So they do work, and they actually are better than a single person. Just even statistically, businesses with partners survive more than businesses without a partnership. So I hope I've given you some things to think about, give you some direction.
You have, definitely.
Great. And for any of you out there thinking about bringing in a partner, I hope I gave you something to think about. And do remember, if you think it, write it down and make it a reality.
The Big Small Business Show, proudly sponsored by MTN Business.